Welcome back to the channel. Today I wanted to talk about a topic that I get a lot of questions about, which is the difference between the keyword static and the keyword class. We see them oftentimes being used in Apple's frameworks and other developers' code. Why are they using static and class and not just saying, static, like a var or using a constant, or why are they just calling a function? Why do they need to use static or class? So let's talk a little bit about it. What does it mean to be static? And what does it mean to be a class? Well, what they mean is when they are used, if you see them in front of something like static let, I'll just name them all out, static var, or class function, or class var. Oops. What do they mean? Well, what it means to be static or class is it means that they belong to the class or struct, I guess you could think of it as. They belong to that object. We'll just say they belong to the class instead of the instance. Let's walk through a very basic example. We have a class. It's called class A. We have a function, and we'll say some function. Okay. And what does that mean? Well, if I have this function, which is some func, and it's part of class A, I can use another class. Let's say I have something called class B, for example, and I have a function that is using class A function to perform some task, right? And okay, if I want to use class A's function, I can't just say A dot or A dot, right? Some function, because I'll get a compiler error and it's going to for the instance of it. I need to create an instance, right? So usually we do this through like let A equal A instantiated, and then we call the function on that instance like this, right? Okay, that's our normal default implementation, and it's saying, okay, yeah, we're not modifying or mutating. Let's just use let. So to get rid of that compiler time check. So okay, that's how we usually do it, right? But oftentimes we see these classes where we have like this static var or something. We'll have something like static variable name, which is a string, which has some sort of crazy getter on it, right? Where they just return something pretty simple, like Ben, right? Or not Ben, but Ben, right? And not Bem, Ben. Okay, great, right? Well, the problem with that is because it belongs to this, if I ever wanted to use it, which is really simple, I don't need an instance. I can literally just call the class and say, I want the name. And that would provide it just like that. Because remember, it belongs, and this is saying definition of type string. Oh, that's fine. So I could say, let name here, which is a string, equal to this, right? And that compiler time should go away. It's because I'm not using it. Okay, yeah. So anyways, so because it belongs to the instance, I don't have to actually create an instance. This class A, has a static variable, which is, it's telling Swift, hey, I'm never going to change, okay? So you can use me without having to create an instance. Now let's check out something like we'll say static function, okay? And we'll say do something, okay. Same thing. I can call that function without having to create an instance, right? So that's great. That's what is really great about static and class. It's the same thing with class. I could change this out and just call this class instead. It belongs to A, the instance, okay? And this could be a class variable as well. Now, what's the difference between this class and static? Why? They seem like they're doing the same thing, aren't they? Well, it comes down to when we're inheriting. So if I'm going to, subclass this class A, static is going to throw a compiler time error when I try to override A's implementation. So let's try the class, for example. So let's say that I come down here and I'm like, okay, I want to override something. We use our override keyword, and I want to override class var name, and we'll make this a string, and we'll set the same getter, right? Because you cannot override something that has a directly assigned value. It has to be some sort of computed property. And I'll just say gen. Okay. So now class, this can be overridden. You notice. Now if I had a static variable or a constant, doesn't matter. We'll just make it a variable. So it's we'll say last name, which is a string, same thing. And we'll throw a getter on here. And we'll say return Bob. Okay, this time. My name's Ben Bob. I'll drop that down and format this correctly. Okay. If I come down here and now I say I want to override last name, okay. Override static variable last name. Well, one, it's not going to compile time check correctly, so it's not going to say anything. But if I try to provide my own default implementation here, get, and I say return something like, let's just say Ren. Okay, boom. It's going to say I cannot override a static variable, right? Because static cannot be subclassed. So if I'm creating a management class, for example, or I'm creating something where I don't want something to change, like I always make static, usually file private static or private static reuse identifiers for table view cells or collection views. I know that someone can't come down the line when they're developing and say, hey, okay, I'm going to create my own custom implementation of A. I'm going to use part of A, which is what subclassing is for, right? I'm going to jam it all in here. And then I'm going to override whatever they're using. No, 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 no. If I don't want someone else to change it, I can say I want it to be static. And that's really what it comes down to. Class variables, class constants, class functions can all be overridden when they're being passed. Static variables, static constants, and static functions cannot. And then the best part about static and class is if I want to write something like a management class, like a user default class or a notification class, I'll use static functions because then I can call them directly on the class instead of on the instance. So that about wraps it up for today. I hope that really helps clarify static versus class versus static and why you might use them. Now, if you don't declare static or class, well, they just belong to the instance, as I showed you earlier. So remember, like in this instance, I have to create, if I want to use something like this do something function, I have to create an instance of A, like this, just to recap. And then I have to call it on A. Make sense? Versus I could say A, let's see, let's use our, you can even call the variable like last name. I think I should just show. But yeah, or A dot do something because they are static or class, which means they belong to this class. Hope that helps clarify a little bit about, like I said, class and static. If you guys have any questions, please leave them in the comments.